Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my overview of Cruel. So generally speaking, when I do overviews, I look at a game for 2 hours, the Steam refund window, we have a little spiel around it. Sometimes there are exceptions. In this case, I've only really played this game for an hour. That is long enough for me to know what it is. I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but it's definitely smaller in scope. Think sort of Vampire Survivors core loop, however, not necessarily the long tail, let's say meta progression that I think a lot of gamers have come to expect. So this video may be shorter, I'm not so sure, but you know, full disclosure, I like to tell people how much time I've spent with it. So the reason I picked this up was, it's only $15, and it kind of reminds me of this sort of runner-shooter genre that we're seeing pop up a little bit. And notably for me, I think of Mullet Mad Jack, which was one of my favorite games last year. I clocked it off the channel. Highly recommended, by the way. If you find this interesting and you don't know what I'm talking about, go and look that game up. This also draws a lot of heavy inspiration. There is an aesthetic there that kind of reminds me a bit of Blood from back in the day, but it's not really mechanically the same. Other things that come to mind are, I think there's Post Void. I barely know anything about it. I missed it when it first came out. Angerfoot is another one late last year I missed, but same sort of thing. Kind of endless corridor-ish shooting up dudes. This game will draw comparisons for me to Mullet Mad Jack because that's the one that I know. And by comparison, this is definitely much more Cruel. This leans into very pixel perfect precision. At first blush, I had to turn the sensitivity down to like 5 out of 100. It was wild, and it has this weird floatiness to the mouse. However, when I made the sensitivity almost as low as it could physically go, I got value out of it and really quite locked on in some of the runs that I was doing. So yes, kind of high skill, to be perfectly honest. So if you don't really like hitting headshots and that, I know there's a whole wave of modern gamers that all want to be CS pros and buy aimbot games or whatever it's called, aim trainers. Not really my cup of tea. I respect this game for being very clean, very tight. It's almost there. So let's just talk about what is there. The core loop is really quite solid. The gunplay works. The run and gun, you've got an impetus, you've just got a building burning down behind you. There's a couple of other chapters I haven't unlocked just yet. But the first one is run through this burning building, right? So if you don't put a bit of hurry in your step, your doom timer's behind you and you're going to die getting set on fire. You come to realize that while you start with a chunk of ammo, you don't really get it back. You go through it quickly, and after a few floors in this, you're going to start really running out. There is a bit of melee as well, and you can kind of weave that in, picking up, weapons off the wall or whatever. The basic dudes are cultists. They have pistols. They're generally 3-shot kill. You really want to hit that headshot, but if you can close the gap on them, maybe stun them with a shot and then melee them, you're laughing. And then there's these sort of like ghost things that you kind of don't want to melee. They essentially detonate and beat you in melee range, so you kind of want to shoot them. So there is this triage of enemy types and how you're going to deal with them with your limited kit in the moment. As you go along, you get more dudes as well, but they're just some touchstone examples in the first couple of floors. You get soft drink cans out of machines you can smash and you drink them, and between floors, there's a cute little puppy that you can feed a soft drink can, because why not? And you can get some pretty arbitrary upgrades. They're not going to set your life on fire. It got to a point where I was just holding onto the cans because they count as health, and they had higher value to me than currency buying kind of crap upgrades. And that's sort of where this game stops. So the core loop, again, to sing its praises, is very clean, very tight for what it is. Though I do wonder what sort of crowd it will attract in. Again, I came from Mullet Mad Jack, and I'm a more, normie gamer. You call me a casual if you want, whatever, but I'm certainly not a hardcore headshot kind of guy. So I feel like with the aesthetic, the sort of person that's going to look at this and go, I will give this a go, probably sits in a more open-minded, indie-centric gamer that doesn't necessarily skew to hardcore precision. So it's a little bit in disguise. Be careful. And so while I recognize that loop might draw the wrong audience, I think if it does find those hardcore sweaty people just one more run, there is kind of a comparison to be made to the core loop of something like Hotline Miami. However, and the other shoe's going to drop, you've felt it in the way that I'm framing this, it stops at the loop. The meta layer, whatever it is, isn't there. Now, I'm kind of critical of meta layer to a point. A lot of games outsource meta progression in roguelites too much, but I feel like it's also become an expected part in a very busy market, i.e. you've got $15 to buy a game, you could buy this or you could buy 100 other games. I mean, there's probably bloody 24 games that came out this week and January is slow. So if you want to go all in, and yes, you've got a tight gameplay loop, that's fine, but every other game, every other contemporary, all the touchstones that I gave you from Hotline Miami all the way through to Mullet Mad Jack, they all have something else, whether it's a storyline keeping you going. I mean, I can't believe I only just thought of it now, but I Am Your Beast, there's another great example of a sort of similar game to this that came out last year. Kind of hard, but very style and substance. But while that game was really short, like a couple of hours, I would still probably recommend it over this because the impetus behind it, the storytelling that they were going for, keeps you a bit more engaged more than the moment-to-moment 10-second intense loop. In fact, I used the comparison of Hotline Miami before. Now, everyone's tried that or played it. I've clocked it because I loved it. I love the music, the aesthetic, and I do wonder how it would go if it came out brand new in current day when the market's a bit more flooded, but I digress. That game could wear you out because of how intense and brutal the little short form loop is. This has the same sort of loop. Whereas I played an hour of this and I'm kind of worn out and it's mostly just grinding that loop over and over again. So it's one of those things, buyer beware. This is not something you're going to sit down and do an 8-hour session. It's probably one of those games where you're going to drop in for a couple of minutes in between things, do a couple of runs, probably get a kick out of it, and then that's it, right? It's very sporadic and brief stuff because there's not much more. So yeah, I suppose that's the biggest crime that you could accuse this game of, is opening into a market where it does have contemporary touchstones that have done similar things from aesthetic to gameplay to even just genre, but they all have other things, whether it's a narrative or a layer of meta progression and upgrades that keep you invested beyond the kind of brutal 1, 2, 3 shots and you're dead kind of loop. So it's good. Is it worth $15? And see, that's going to be tough. Obviously, value is very subjective. But as I play this, I think of things like, buckshot roulette going for a couple of dollars. I even used Vampire Survivors as a bit of a touchstone, another couple of dollars. This game's probably overpriced, even though it's not exactly asking a huge amount of money. And maybe you are like me, you're willing to drop this money on it just to see what it's about. But for what's in there compared to what else is out there, it probably is a bit overpriced for what it's offering. Anyway, so I hope I wasn't too cruel on this game. That's not the intention. I think what it's doing is really quite good. And I do argue often for devs taking an appropriate bite of the pie. Like, do not flood your game with too many mechanics and bullshit and fluff. Just take a smaller bite. I do wonder if maybe they took too small a bite here. But perhaps that's subjective. The point is to inform you. Go forth informed, make up your mind. Anyway, team, might just leave it there for the time being and I'll catch you guys on the next one.